Without reading our little notes here, Nick, tell me what full grain leather is.
So there's a bunch of different kinds or ways to describe leather. Full grain, really just means leather that has not had anything done to the very surface of it. So the grain where the hair was growing out of. So the grain, which is the pores or the hair holes, nothing has been done to smooth them out or get rid of them or cover them up. So generally speaking, full grain leather is the most, or can be the most expensive because it requires the cleanest, best raw material because you're not using anything to cover up imperfections or anything else that might be there that whoever's using the leather wouldn't want in the finished product.
I thought I knew the answer to what full grain is. Are you implying that the finishing method has to do with the character of the grain? Because you're talking about covering it up.
I mean, you could take something that's full grain crust that's really nasty and make it patent if you wanted to. I mean, so you could completely cover the grain up with a rubber coating or a polyurethane coating, and then I guess technically it's still full grain underneath that coating, but
it's irrelevant.
It's not. Why? There's no grain anymore. So it's a little bit of it kind of be splitting hairs there a little bit, but that's just the way I was kind of thinking about it.
For me, calling something full grain kind of means like it's the most naturally appearing leather that you can get. And when I think about full grain leather, I think about the hair holes a bit. Is that something that you relate to?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's because grain, you talk about grain character, and grain character is different depending on the hide type. Like, bison, the grain is a lot more pronounced and a lot coarser than something like steer hide. And then you get even finer grain character when you go to calf because the hair is, finer, the smaller diameter, the hair itself. So the holes are smaller. So the grain gets finer. So that's kind of what's defining the characteristics of the grain.
When I think about it too, I kind of visualize like the surface of the moon or something where there's these little craters, which would be the analogy to the hair holes of the grain. And by correcting the grain, which is the opposite of full grain, you sort of sand down the like peaks of those craters to make the crater itself less deep. That's how I sort of envision it. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, I think that there are degrees of correcting. I mean, because like you said, correcting is sanding. So you're using sandpaper to affect the surface. I mean, you can do the grain side, or you can do the suede side, the flesh side, and you can sand that too if you're going to be using that, or if there's a reason to sand it, like it needs to be cemented or glued or something. But there are degrees of correcting. So I think that, speaking from what we do at Horween, we do correct leather, but it tends to be less extreme than maybe what you would find other places in the world because we're using finer grit sandpaper. So
it's more like a polish or...
Yeah, so your analogy, I think, is correct there because we're not taking away all of the grain. We're just sort of leveling it out and making it kind of like, it's almost like you said, like a polishing. But you can use, coarser grit sandpaper and take the grain completely off.
You can make that surface of the moon into like a cue ball.
Yeah. Eventually, not just through sanding, but yeah, because you could make it it's like a nubuck then or a micro suede where there's no grain left.
I've seen... They get a little contentious here, but I've seen the word full grain being used in marketing language to sell product, implying that it has some sort of inherent value that is more significant or more superior to something that's not full grain. I mean, what's your take on that? I have some opinions, but
yeah, I think that a lot of it. I think more of the characteristic comes from maybe the tanning itself. What's stronger or what's smoother, what's gonna...
Because it depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, it depends on the tannage and the retannage. You do need the highest or the nicest or the cleanest raw material. So it tends to be costly, but you can tan full grain, make a full grain leather that's terrible, and make a corrected grain leather that's amazing. It really depends on what you're doing and if you're doing it right. There's just so many different ways to tan. But I think that in general, full grain leather tends to be less finished because you're trying to showcase the grain anyway. So I think that it's not necessarily that leather is gonna do something different than other leathers do if they were tanned the same way, but it lends itself to a different or to a more specific or narrower type of tannage, which tends to age better because there's less covering it up, which means less pigment, which means less stuff getting in the way of the daily stuff that's going to add patina and age it down.
So I'm trying to think of a way to add value to somebody that's in the market for a jacket or gloves or shoes or boots or whatever. I mean, when somebody sees the word full grain in a car ad or something, and they're talking about their beautiful aniline full grain leather seats, a lot of marketing spins and just words that I think are thrown out there to sort of to raise up the perceived value of whatever they're selling. When somebody sees these words, what do you suggest to them to think about?
There are words that you can put on leather products that don't really, they just don't really mean much, especially anymore. But we talk about, or in the just the definitions of full grain. If you just Google,
oh yeah, let's pull that up.
Like full grain leather, this is the first result. Full grain leather simply means the hair is removed and the hide goes immediately into the tanning process, which is just not correct.
This is the number one Google
It's
result.
bold on Google. It's just not. The hair is removed and the hide goes immediately into the tanning process, literally for every single leather on the planet. So it doesn't. It actually. It's like it's way jumping the gun. It just means the hair is removed and the hide goes immediately into the tanning process, and then nothing is done to the grain during the finishing process. I guess it just needs a lot of
I'm trying
massaging to even be remotely correct.
I was trying to see if there's like a Wikipedia entry, because usually, I know enough about leather to know if something's nonsense, but let's see what Wikipedia says.
That's better. That's a lot better.
Yeah, you see Wikipedia. All right.
That's better.
Wikipedia says full grain leather contains the entire grain layer without any removal of the surface. But I think the real important question is like, who cares?
Also, and then the next sentence is totally dubious. Rather than wearing out, it develops a patina during its useful lifetime, which could.
Depends if you finish it and what's in the leather.
And what you're using it for. That's a pretty loosey goosey.